is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being.
Do you ever feel like that? Like a fish out of water? You're flopping around, gasping for breath? Do you ever feel like it's just harder to be who you should be than it should be? Don't we sometimes feel like that? Like it's just harder to be who we should be than it should be. Work is hard. Family is hard. Marriage, it's hard. Friendship, it's hard too. Being a human being is hard. You get tired, you get sick, you get hurt, you get bitter. All of us feel that way some of the time. And maybe some of us feel that way all of the time. You're flopping around, gasping for breath.
You've heard the story, you know how it goes. Once upon a garden, we were lovers with no clothes. Fresh from the soil, we were beautiful and true, in control of our emotions, till we ate the poison fruit. And now it's hard to be, hard to be, hard to be a decent human being.
Think about the fish. Why does it struggle so? Is it struggling because it's a fish or it's doing fish wrong? Or isn't it struggling because it's a fish out of water, a fish misplaced? I mean, isn't it harder for the fish to be who the fish should be than it should be because the fish is a fish out of water? Well, maybe it's harder for you to be who you should be than it should be because you are a fish out of water too. In other words, if you feel like a fish out of water, maybe there's not a flaw in your design, but in your placement. You know, in Genesis 1 and 2, we're told that God created the heavens and the earth, and he created human beings too, and he created all of it very good. The design was good. But then in Genesis 3, we find that, well, we jumped out of the fishbowl called Eden. And we became misplaced because, well, Eden is the place that we were created to live and thrive. Eden represents the habitable environment in which God designed us to thrive. That's the place we're longing to be, but it's not so much a garden as it is a loving relationship with God. As long as the fish stays in the water, the fish is good. Good fish. But once the fish is removed from the water, the fish is not good. And the only hope for the fish is that somehow it can find its way back to its Eden, the water. But how? Can the fish flop his way back in? It's possible for the fish to jump out, but is it possible for the fish to jump back in? No. The way back is barred by impenetrable glass and unscalable walls. No pun intended. The fish can't get back into the bowl. We can't get back into our natural habitat either. In Genesis, we find we can't find our way back to a loving relationship with God. The way back to Eden has been barred.
He drove out the man, And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life.
The fish can't get back into the bowl, but there is hope. You see, someone can scoop the fish up and place it back in the water. That's resurrection. When the fish is placed back in the water, it moves from death and dying to life and living. That's resurrection. It moves from struggling to moving gracefully through its natural habitat. That's resurrection. There's a story in the Bible about resurrection. It's the story of Lazarus, a friend of Jesus who dies. And when Jesus shows up, he has a conversation with Martha, the sister of Lazarus.
Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die."
The thing that is so fascinating to me is that Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, Lazarus, you were dead. Now you get a few more years on this planet. You've been resurrected." He says, "I am the resurrection. You haven't been brought back to life. You've been brought back to me. I am the resurrection and the life." Resurrection can't just mean a few more years on this planet. And it has to be better than that. And it is. Because when Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life," he means that, well, it's possible for us to move from struggling through life to moving gracefully through our natural habitat of a loving relationship with him. Resurrection means you stop dying and you start living. Resurrection means you stop being anxious all the time. You stop being negative and angry and bitter, and you start experiencing hope and peace and joy. For the fish, resurrection is being placed back in the water. You see, for the fish, the water is life. But what is resurrection for a human being? A resurrection is being placed back in a right relationship with God. Well, what is life? Jesus says, "I am." Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and I am the life. I am the way to be placed back in the ocean, and I am the ocean." But isn't it bizarre that we live in a world filled with fish that have rejected the ocean? Maybe they don't even know it. Are you struggling so much because you've rejected God? Are you struggling because, well, you've fallen out of your natural habitat? You know, it may be that there are fish that don't even know the ocean exists. Or maybe they've been told about the ocean, but it just sounds too good to be true. Maybe that's you. You've heard about God, but it just sounds too good to be true. But maybe it's not. And if you're a Christian, maybe there are some flopping fish in your life that need to see you swimming through life gracefully, empowered by a loving relationship with God. How often did you visit the ocean this week? Some visit the ocean but have no intention of getting in. I mean, you're here. God's presence is all around you. But are you interacting with Him? Are you interacting with Him? Some people are uncomfortable talking about God. In other words, some people are uncomfortable talking about the ocean, so they pay someone else to do it. And then some of us are paid to talk about the ocean, but we're often flopping and gasping as much as everyone else. In fact, if I'm honest, I've been flopping and gasping a lot more than I'd like to admit recently. So what am I going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Maybe it's time to get more than our feet wet. Maybe it's time to get in the water. Am I going to prioritize time with God this week? Are you?
I wanna swim in you. I can't let go from moments in your arms, but they come back again. The waves, 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 the waves.
In him we live and move and have our being.
Here you are next to me, so much beauty at my feet. All I wanna do is swim, but the waves keep crashing in. No, I'm not afraid to drown. Take me out, take me down. I'm so tired of the shore. Let me in, baby. You're an ocean beautiful and blue.